The words cut through the first-class cabin of Elite Airlines Flight 847 like a blade. Victoria Hartwell's voice dripped with venom as she gestured dismissively at the woman standing beside her. In one fluid motion, she lifted her champagne flute and deliberately poured the golden liquid over Maya Rodriguez's pristine beige coat and dark loafers. The crystal glass shattered against the cabin floor, sending shards across the premium carpet. "Oops," Victoria said with a cold smile, not a trace of genuine remorse in her voice. "How clumsy of me." The first-class cabin fell silent except for the gentle hum of the aircraft's ventilation system. 24 passengers turned to stare. Flight attendants froze mid-service. Even the rain hammering against the windows of Miami International Airport seemed to pause. Maya Rodriguez stood motionless, champagne dripping from her coat, her dark eyes fixed on Victoria's face. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. "In exactly 12 minutes, this aircraft will never fly again." Victoria laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the cabin walls. "You think you can threaten me? Do you have any idea who I am? Who my husband is?" But Maya wasn't looking at Victoria anymore. She was looking at her phone thumb hovering over a single contact. When she pressed it, the call that would follow would ground not just this plane, but potentially the entire Elite Airlines fleet. The woman Victoria had just humiliated wasn't a diversity hire. She wasn't someone trying to sneak into first class with a fake ticket or an employee upgrade. Maya Rodriguez was the CEO of Apex Global Solutions, a $12 billion transportation empire that controlled the logistics, cargo operations, and maintenance contracts, keeping Elite Airlines in the sky. And Victoria Hartwell had just declared war on the one person who could bring her world crashing down. But let's rewind. Let's see how this moment came to be, because what happened next would change not just these two women's lives, but the entire aviation industry, forever. 30 minutes earlier, Maya Rodriguez moved through the bustling corridors of Miami International Airport like a ghost among the chaos. Travelers rushed past her, dragging oversized suitcases and clutching boarding passes, but none gave her a second glance. She was deliberately invisible. At 35, Maya had built Apex Global Solutions from a single delivery truck into a transportation empire that moved goods across 6 continents. Her company's orange and black logo was stamped on cargo containers in every major port on freight trains crossing the American heartland and on the massive logistics hubs that kept global commerce flowing. But today she looked like any other tired business traveler. Her shoulder-length hair was pulled back in a neat but simple bun. Her beige trench coat, while expensive, was understated. Beneath it, she wore a dark charcoal dress and comfortable flats. No flashy jewelry, no designer handbag screaming wealth, no entourage of assistants clearing her path. The anonymity was intentional. For 6 months, Apex Global had been receiving anonymous complaints about Elite Airlines. Emails from passengers describing discrimination at check-in counters during boarding and in-flight. Stories of minority travelers being questioned about their tickets, moved to different seats without explanation, or treated with suspicious hostility by staff members. The complaints followed a pattern. They were subtle, often involving passengers who didn't look like they belonged in premium cabins. Maya had read every single report, and each one had made her angrier than the last. As the CEO whose company held Elite Airlines' most lucrative contracts, Maya could have simply called the airline's board directly. She could have demanded meetings, investigations, policy changes. But she wanted to see the truth with her own eyes. So she had booked herself on Flight 847 to London under the simple name M. Rodriguez, deliberately choosing the ambiguous initial that could be masculine or feminine. She had purchased Seat 1A, the most premium location in the aircraft, and waited to see how she would be treated. The answer was about to become crystal clear. Maya approached Gate B7, where Elite Airlines Flight 847 was beginning its boarding process. The gate area buzzed with the usual mix of business travelers, families, and crew members preparing for the overnight flight to Heathrow. Behind the podium stood Sarah Martinez, a 24-year-old gate agent with tired eyes and a forced smile. Sarah had been working for Elite Airlines for 3 years, and in that time, she had learned to follow the unwritten rules that veteran employees pass down like sacred knowledge. Keep an eye on passengers who don't look like they belong in premium cabins, her supervisor had told her during training. Sometimes people try to upgrade themselves. Better to double-check than deal with complaints later. It was advice that would cost Sarah her job in less than an hour. "Good evening, Ms. Rodriguez," Sarah said, scanning Maya's boarding pass. "Seat 1A, excellent choice. Thank you for flying Elite Airlines." Maya smiled genuinely. "Thank you, Sarah." The politeness wouldn't last. As Maya walked down the jet bridge, she pulled out her phone and sent a brief text to Amanda Rivera, her corporate security director, Phase 1 complete. "Monitoring begins now." Amanda's response was immediate. "All recording devices active. Legal team on standby." Maya slipped the phone back into her coat pocket. Whatever happened next would be documented, analyzed, and if necessary, used as evidence. She had learned long ago that change only happened when people were held accountable for their actions, and accountability required proof. The Boeing 707's first-class cabin was a marvel of modern aviation luxury. 8 private suites arranged in a 1-2-1 configuration, each with lie-flat beds, sliding privacy doors, and enough space for a passenger to move around comfortably. The cream-colored leather-polished wood accents and soft ambient lighting created an atmosphere of exclusive tranquility. Maya turned left from the boarding door and located row 1. Her suite 1A was positioned at the window on the port side, offering privacy and a view. She had specifically chosen this seat because it was the most visible symbol of the premium experience, the place where discrimination would be most obvious if it occurred. As she approached her seat, Maya stopped. There was someone already there. Victoria Hartwell commanded attention like a force of nature. At 42, she had perfected the art of looking expensive. Her short blonde hair was styled in architectural waves that defied humidity and turbulence. Her bright yellow Chanel suit blazer bore the subtle logos that whispered wealth to those who could recognize them. Her matching yellow Christian Louboutin heels added 3 inches to her height, and her oversized Tom Ford sunglasses remained perched on her nose despite being indoors. Victoria wasn't just sitting in seat 1A, she was occupying it like a conquering army. Her designer purse claimed the seat next to her. Her champagne flute rested on the armrest. Her shoes were already off, and she had activated the massage function. She looked like a woman who had never heard the word no and wouldn't recognize it if she did. Maya checked her boarding pass 1A, Rodriguez M. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that this was exactly the kind of situation she had come to observe. "Excuse me," Maya said politely, stepping into the narrow aisle space beside the suite. Victoria didn't look up. She was scrolling through her phone, her acrylic nails clicking against the screen with aggressive efficiency. "Excuse me," Maya repeated slightly louder. This time, Victoria glanced up, her ice blue eyes taking in Maya's appearance with obvious distaste. The assessment was quick and dismissive: young black woman, casual clothing, no visible status symbols. Victoria's conclusion was immediate and wrong. "The lavatory is in the back," Victoria said, her voice carrying the tone of someone addressing hired help. "Economy boarding is through the main door behind you." Maya didn't react to the insult. She had expected it. "I'm not looking for the lavatory," Maya said calmly. "You're in my seat." Victoria's laugh was sharp and ugly. She looked Maya up and down again, this time with unconcealed contempt. "I hardly think so. This is first class, sweetheart. Maybe you should check your ticket again." Maya held up her phone, displaying her boarding pass. Seat 1A, Maya Rodriguez. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Victoria didn't even glance at the screen. The manifest must have been wrong. People like you don't fly first class unless someone made a mistake or you're using miles you didn't earn yourself. The racist implication hung in the air like smoke. Maya felt the familiar surge of anger that she had learned to control over the years, the rage of a successful woman whose accomplishments were constantly questioned because of the color of her skin. But Maya Rodriguez hadn't built a $12 billion company by losing her temper. She had built it by being smarter, more strategic, and more patient than her competitors. And right now, patience was her greatest weapon. I assure you there's no mistake, Maya said, her voice remaining steady. This is my seat and I'd like to sit down. Victoria's eyes flashed with indignation. She snapped her fingers at the air, a gesture so entitled that several nearby passengers turned to stare. Attendant Victoria called loudly. Attendant, there's a situation here. Luis Morales hurried over, his face flushed with the stress that came from working a delayed flight full of impatient passengers. At 28, Luis had been with elite airlines for 5 years, working his way up from ground crew to flight attendant. He loved his job, loved traveling, loved meeting people from around the world. But moments like this made him question everything. Yes, ma'am, Luis said, glancing nervously between Maya and Victoria. How can I help you? Victoria gestured at Maya with her champagne flute. This person is harassing me. She claims she has this seat, but obviously there's been some kind of error. Tell her to go back to coach where she belongs. Luis looked at Maya, who calmly showed him her boarding pass. His face went pale as he read it. Ms. Rodriguez, Luis said carefully, your seat is indeed 1A. Ma'am. He turned to Victoria. May I see your boarding pass, please? Victoria's face flushed red. This is ridiculous. I'm a Platinum Elite member. My husband is Preston Hartwell. Do you know who that is? He owns half the real estate in Miami. I still need to see your boarding pass. Luis said, his voice trembling slightly. With an exaggerated sigh, Victoria dug through her designer purse and produced a crumpled boarding pass. Luis scanned it quickly and his shoulders sagged with resignation. Ma'am, your seat is 4C. This is Ms. Rodriguez's assigned seat. The words should have ended the confrontation. In a reasonable world, Victoria would have gathered her belongings, apologized for the confusion, and moved to her correct seat. But Victoria Hartwell didn't live in a reasonable world. She lived in a world where her money, her husband's connections, and her skin color had always been enough to get her way. She wasn't moving. No, Victoria said simply. The word fell into the cabin like a stone into still water, creating ripples of tension that spread outward. Other passengers looked up from their phones and magazines. The businessman in 2B stopped typing on his laptop. The woman in 3A lowered her book. I'm sorry, Maya asked. I said no, Victoria repeated, settling deeper into the leather seat. I'm comfortable here. I have a medical condition, sciatica, and I need the bulkhead space. You're young and obviously able-bodied. Take 4C. It's still first class. Stop making such a fuss about it. Maya felt the moment crystallize around her. This was it. This was the test case she had been looking for, the perfect example of how discrimination worked in the modern world. Not with burning crosses or explicit slurs, but with subtle dismissals, moving goalposts, and the casual assumption that some people mattered more than others. Victoria had just made herself the face of everything Maya was fighting against. I paid for this seat, Maya said, her voice dropping to a lower register. And I'm not moving. Victoria's smile was cold and predatory. Well, I'm not moving either. So I guess you can either take 4C or get off the plane. Luis stood frozen between them, paralyzed by a situation his training had never prepared him for. He could see this escalating quickly, but he didn't know how to stop it without angering a VIP passenger or violating company policy. That hesitation would cost him his job within the hour. But Maya Rodriguez had faced down hostile boardrooms, predatory competitors, and bias throughout her career. She had learned that the most powerful response to aggression wasn't escalation, but patience. Let your enemies expose themselves. Let them show everyone exactly who they really are. Interesting, Maya said, pulling out her phone. Very interesting. Victoria laughed again. What are you going to do? Tweet about it? File a complaint? Do you think anyone cares what someone like you has to say? Maya looked directly into Victoria's eyes as she speed-dialed a number. When the call connected, she spoke just loudly enough for Victoria to hear. Amanda, it's Maya. Yes, it's happening. Initiate monitoring protocol. Full documentation begins now. She hung up and slipped the phone back into her coat. 12 minutes, Maya said quietly. Victoria's confident smirk faltered slightly. There had been something in Maya's voice, something that suggested she wasn't quite the powerless victim Victoria had assumed her to be. But Victoria Hartwell had never learned to back down. And that character flaw was about to cost her everything. You think making phone calls is going to help you? Victoria's voice had risen loud enough that every passenger in first class was now watching the confrontation unfold. I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but it ends here. Victoria stood up, her yellow heels clicking against the aircraft floor as she positioned herself between Maya and the seat. At 5'8" in heels, she towered over Maya's more modest height, using her physical presence as a tool of intimidation. Security Victoria called toward the galley. I need security up here immediately. Maya remained calm, but inside she was cataloging every word, every gesture, every witness. The discrimination she had come to investigate wasn't hiding in shadows or coded language. It was happening in broad daylight in front of 24 witnesses with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Ma'am, please lower your voice, Louise pleaded, glancing nervously toward the economy cabin where passengers were straining to see what was happening. We can resolve this quietly. Quietly, Victoria's laugh was harsh and bitter. This woman is trying to steal my seat, and you want me to be quiet about it? I don't think so. Jennifer Walsh, the senior flight attendant, appeared from the galley with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to handling difficult passengers. At 38, Jennifer had seen every type of first-class drama imaginable, from celebrities throwing tantrums to executives having nervous breakdowns. But something about this situation felt different. What seems to be the problem here? Jennifer asked, her voice professionally neutral. Victoria immediately seized control of the narrative. This woman is claiming she has seat 1A, but obviously there's been some kind of mistake. She doesn't belong in first class. Look at how she's dressed. Look at her attitude. She's clearly trying to scam her way into a seat she can't afford. Jennifer's eyes flicked over Maya's casual attire, and Maya could see the instant calculation happening behind the flight attendant's professional smile. The unwritten rules were being applied in real time. Well-dressed passengers got the benefit of the doubt, while those who looked out of place faced scrutiny. May I see both of your boarding passes? Jennifer asked. Maya immediately produced her phone with the digital boarding pass clearly visible. Victoria, after a moment's hesitation, handed over her crumpled paper ticket. Jennifer studied both documents, her face carefully neutral. But Maya could see the conflict playing out in the flight attendant's eyes. Policy said one thing, but the unspoken expectations of premium service said another. Ms. Rodriguez, Jennifer said carefully, your boarding pass does show seat 1A. However, Mrs. Hartwell is a Platinum Elite member with special medical needs. Perhaps we could find you a comparable seat in first class. The suggestion was couched in diplomatic language, but its meaning was clear. Make the problem go away by accommodating the passenger who looked like she belonged. Maya felt the familiar surge of anger that every successful person of color knew intimately. The assumption that she should be grateful for whatever accommodation was offered, that her rights were negotiable while others were absolute. I don't want a comparable seat, Maya said, her voice steady despite the fire building inside her. I want my seat, the one I purchased, the one that's assigned to me on the manifest. Victoria's face flushed red with indignation. Listen, sweetheart, I don't know what kind of diversity program got you this ticket, but some of us actually paid full price for first class. Some of us actually belong here. The racist subtext wasn't even subtle anymore. It hung in the cabin air like thick smoke, impossible to ignore or explain away. From seat 2B, Marcus Thompson looked up from his laptop. At 31, Marcus was a tech blogger with a modest but dedicated following of 50,000 readers who valued his insights on digital innovation and corporate culture. He had been trying to work on a column about airline technology, but the confrontation had become impossible to ignore. More importantly, Marcus recognized injustice when he saw it. "Excuse me," Marcus said, addressing Jennifer but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Did I just witness discrimination based on race? Because that's what this looks like to me." Victoria whirled around to face him. "Mind your own business. This has nothing to do with race. It has to do with someone trying to steal a seat that doesn't belong to her." "The boarding pass says otherwise," Marcus replied, pulling out his phone. "And I'm a blogger. This kind of story is exactly my business." Elena Vasquez, seated across the aisle in 2A, had been live streaming her travel experience for her Instagram followers when the confrontation began. At 29, Elena ran a small but growing lifestyle blog that focused on luxury travel and cultural experiences. She had never intended to document discrimination, but she wasn't about to look away when it happened in front of her. "This is unreal," Elena murmured to her phone's camera, keeping her voice low but her recording active. "I'm watching a black woman being denied her assigned first-class seat by another passenger who's making openly racist comments. This is Elite Airlines Flight 847, and this is happening right now." David Brennan, the 52-year-old businessman in seat 3B, had been reading the Wall Street Journal when the confrontation began. As a senior executive with a major consulting firm, David was accustomed to flying first class and had grown comfortable with the unspoken hierarchies of premium air travel. But watching Victoria's behavior, he found himself increasingly uncomfortable. Her statements were crossing lines that even he couldn't ignore. Perhaps David said diplomatically, "We should all just follow the seat assignments. It seems like the simplest solution." Victoria turned on him with fury. "Et tu? David, are you really going to side with her over a fellow first-class passenger?" The phrase "fellow first-class passenger" carried implications that made David wince. He was beginning to realize that his silence would be interpreted as complicity. "I'm siding with basic fairness," David said quietly. Jennifer Walsh felt the situation spiraling beyond her control. Her training had taught her to de-escalate conflicts, but nothing had prepared her for a passenger who refused to move from a seat that clearly wasn't theirs, especially when that refusal was accompanied by increasingly explicit discrimination. "Mrs. Hartwell," Jennifer said, trying to regain control, "I really must insist that you take your assigned seat. Federal regulations require passengers to be seated according to the manifest for takeoff." Victoria's response was to pour herself another glass of champagne from the bottle that had been served in first class. She took a long sip, then looked directly at Maya. "You want this seat so badly. Prove you belong here. Show me a receipt for a full-fare first-class ticket. Show me a corporate credit card. Show me anything that proves you didn't get this seat through some affirmative action program or employee discount." The demand was so outrageous, so explicitly discriminatory, that several passengers gasped audibly. Marcus had his phone out now, openly recording. Elena's live stream was gaining viewers by the minute as word spread across social media. Maya looked around the cabin, taking in the faces of everyone watching. Some showed sympathy, others discomfort. A few displayed the blank expressions of people trying to pretend they weren't witnessing something terrible. This was the moment she had come to find. The perfect, undeniable example of how discrimination worked in corporate America. Not through burning crosses or explicit slurs, but through the casual assumption that success achieved by people of color must be illegitimate, that their presence in spaces of privilege required additional justification. "You want proof?" Maya asked quietly. "Damn right I want proof," Victoria snapped. Maya pulled out her phone again. This time she didn't make a call. Instead, she opened an app and turned the screen toward Victoria. It was a live feed from the Elite Airlines Operations Center showing Flight 847's departure status in real time. At the top of the screen in bold letters was a message that made Victoria's face drain of color. "Apex Global Security Alert. Flight 847. Flagged for immediate review. Discrimination incident in progress." "What?" Victoria stammered, staring at the screen. "What is that?" Maya's voice remained calm, but now it carried an undertone of steel. "That's your proof. That's the evidence that I don't just belong in this seat. I belong in this entire industry." Victoria's champagne glass trembled in her hand. For the first time since the confrontation began, doubt crept into her voice. "I don't understand. Who are you?" But Maya wasn't ready to answer that question. Not yet. Victoria had made her choices, revealed her character, and exposed the ugly assumptions that drove her behavior. Now it was time for those choices to have consequences. "You'll find out," Maya said softly. "In about 8 minutes." Luis Morales stood frozen, watching the confrontation escalate beyond anything his training had prepared him for. He could see that Victoria was clearly in the wrong, that her behavior was becoming increasingly discriminatory and hostile. But he also knew that Victoria was married to one of Elite Airline's biggest corporate clients, while Maya appeared to be traveling alone with no obvious corporate connections. The calculation was brutal and simple. Angering Victoria could cost him his job immediately, while standing up for Maya might be the right thing to do, but offered no protection. It was a choice that millions of service workers faced every day, and Luis was about to learn that sometimes doing nothing was its own form of action. Captain Robert Kane had been monitoring the situation from the cockpit through reports from the cabin crew. As a 20-year veteran of commercial aviation, Kane had seen his share of passenger disputes, but the reports coming from first class were unusual in their intensity and racial implications. Standard protocol was clear: get the plane-moving deal with passenger issues in the air, and let corporate handle the fallout later. But the social media attention that Marcus and Elena were generating was turning this into a very public relations nightmare. Kane made a decision that would haunt his career: keep the plane at the gate until the situation resolved itself, but don't intervene directly. Let the cabin crew handle it. It was the kind of leadership failure that destroyed reputations and ended careers. "Ladies and gentlemen," came Kane's voice over the intercom. "We're experiencing a slight delay due to a passenger service issue. We'll have you airborne shortly." The announcement sent ripples of frustration through the economy cabin, where passengers were growing restless after an already lengthy delay. But in first class, it felt like a countdown timer had just started ticking. Victoria seemed to sense that time was running out for her to establish dominance. She stood up again, this time moving closer to Maya in a gesture that was clearly meant to be intimidating. "I don't know what game you're playing," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "But it ends now. People like you need to learn your place. You don't belong in first class. You don't belong in spaces that successful people have worked hard to afford. And you certainly don't belong in my seat." Maya didn't step back. She didn't flinch. She simply looked into Victoria's eyes and spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced down hostile takeover attempts and billion-dollar negotiations. "Mrs. Hartwell," Maya said calmly, "you have made this about race from the very beginning. You have discriminated against me, insulted me, and refused to follow federal aviation regulations. You have done all of this in front of multiple witnesses who are recording your behavior and broadcasting it to the world." Victoria's face went white. For the first time, she glanced around the cabin and saw the phones pointed in her direction, the horrified expressions on other passengers' faces, the crew members who were no longer even pretending to support her position. I wasn't..." Victoria stammered. "You were," Maya said firmly, "and now you're going to face the consequences. All of them." Maya raised her phone one more time. This call would be different from the others. This call would change everything. Amanda Maya said when the call connected Phase 2. "Full implementation. Execute immediately." She hung up and looked at Victoria one last time. 5 minutes, Maya said quietly. Victoria's champagne glass slipped from her nerveless fingers and shattered against the cabin floor, sending crystal shards across the first-class aisle. The sound was sharp and final, like the breaking of something that could never be repaired. The woman who had entered this confrontation confident in her superiority was about to learn that she had chosen the wrong person to humiliate the wrong day to reveal her true character and the wrong plane on which to make her stand. Maya Rodriguez was done being patient. Marcus Thompson's fingers flew across his smartphone screen as he live-tweeted the unfolding drama. His first tweet was simple, witnessing open discrimination on elite Airlines Flight 847. Black passenger denied her assigned first-class seat by white passenger, making explicitly racist comments. This is happening right now. Within 30 seconds, the tweet had 12 retweets. Within 2 minutes, it had over 100. Marcus had covered corporate malfeasance and tech industry scandals for years, but he had never seen engagement explode quite like this. His second tweet included video, "Here's the actual boarding passes." The black passenger clearly has seat 1A. The white passenger refuses to move and just demanded proof that the black passenger belongs in first class. Audio is clear. The video, just 45 seconds long, captured Victoria's demand for proof and Maya's calm response. It showed the boarding passes, the scattered champagne glass, and Victoria's increasingly aggressive body language. Most importantly, it captured audio of Victoria saying, "People like you need to learn your place." That video would be viewed 2.3 million times in the next 6 hours. Elena Vasquez had started the flight by live-streaming her pre-departure routine for her 15,000 Instagram followers. She was known for showcasing luxury travel experiences, beautiful hotel rooms, and first-class airline amenities. But when the confrontation began, her stream transformed into something much more significant. "Okay, guys," Elena whispered to her phone camera, keeping her voice low but her image steady. "I need everyone to witness what's happening right now. I'm in first class on elite airlines, and there's a situation developing that everyone needs to see." Her follower count was climbing in real time as viewers shared the stream. 16,000, 18,000, 22,000. The comments section was exploding with outraged support for Maya and demands for accountability. "Can someone screen record this?" Elena whispered. "This needs to be preserved. This woman is being discriminated against, and it's happening live." Dozens of her followers were already recording the stream, creating a permanent digital record of events that elite airlines would find impossible to deny or spin. Elena turned her camera toward Maya, capturing her composure under pressure. Then she panned to Victoria, whose face was flushed with anger and something that was beginning to look like panic. "The blonde woman in yellow has been in the wrong seat this entire time," Elena narrated for her audience. "She's refused to move, made racist comments, and now she's demanding that the rightful passenger prove she belongs in first class. This is discrimination live and unfiltered." David Brennan had put down his Wall Street Journal completely. As a senior executive who had attended diversity and inclusion training, he recognized that he was witnessing textbook discrimination. His corporate instincts told him to stay neutral, but his conscience was demanding action. He pulled out his own phone and began recording. "I'm documenting this for corporate accountability purposes," David announced, making sure his voice was audible to everyone in the cabin. "What I'm witnessing appears to be clear discrimination based on race. The facts are simple, Ms. Rodriguez has the correct boarding pass for seat 1A, Mrs. Hartwell does not, and Mrs. Hartwell has made several comments that appear to be motivated by racial bias." David's corporate language gave his statement additional weight. This wasn't just social media outrage. This was potential legal evidence being documented by a business professional. Luis Morales found himself trapped in an impossible situation. His training emphasized customer service and conflict de-escalation, but it had never prepared him for a situation where following company policy would mean directly confronting a VIP passenger's racist behavior. Jennifer Walsh pulled Luis aside, speaking in urgent whispers near the galley. "We need to get this resolved now," Jennifer hissed. "The captain is asking for updates, and passengers in economy are starting to complain about the delay." "What do you want me to do?" Luis whispered back. "Mrs. Hartwell is clearly in the wrong, but she's a platinum member, and her husband has connections to the airline's board." "Figure it out," Jennifer snapped. "That's why they pay you." It was exactly the kind of institutional pressure that perpetuated discrimination. Don't make waves. Don't anger important passengers. Find a way to make problems disappear even when those problems involved obvious violations of passenger rights and federal regulations. Luis walked back toward the confrontation, his face pale with stress. He had a choice to make, and he was beginning to understand that his decision would define not just this moment, but his entire career. Meanwhile, hashtags were beginning to trend on Twitter. Elite Airlines bias had been picked up by Marcus's tech community followers and was spreading rapidly. Flight discrimination was gaining traction among civil rights advocates. Seat stolen was becoming a rallying cry. Celebrity activists started weighing in. A prominent civil rights lawyer retweeted Marcus's video with the comment, "This is exactly how discrimination works in 2024. Subtle coded but absolutely clear to anyone willing to see it." A famous actress shared Elena's live stream writing, "Everyone needs to watch this. This is what Black women face every day, even in first class, even when they've done everything right." The story was escaping the confines of Flight 847 and becoming a national conversation about discrimination, corporate accountability, and the persistence of racial bias in spaces of privilege. Elite Airlines' social media team was scrambling to respond, but they faced an impossible situation. The evidence was overwhelming. The discrimination was obvious, and the story was being told in real time by multiple witnesses with substantial social media followings. Their first response was tone-deaf, and corporate Elite Airlines is committed to providing excellent service to all passengers. "We are investigating reports of a customer service issue on Flight 847. The response was ratioed within minutes, buried under thousands of replies demanding action, accountability, and consequences." Back in first class, Victoria was beginning to understand that the situation had spiraled far beyond her control. She could see the phones pointed at her, could hear Marcus and Elena narrating her behavior for their audiences, could feel the weight of judgment from every other passenger in the cabin. But Victoria Hartwell had never learned to back down gracefully. Instead of apologizing or quietly moving to her correct seat, she doubled down. "This is harassment," Victoria announced loudly, pointing at the passengers who were recording. "You're all ganging up on me because I dared to stand up for myself. This woman is clearly lying about her seat assignment, and you're all too politically correct to admit it." The statement was so tone-deaf, so completely divorced from reality, that several passengers audibly gasped. Marcus immediately tweeted the quote verbatim, adding, "The cognitive dissonance is stunning. She's literally the person doing the harassing, but she's claiming to be the victim." Elena captured Victoria's statement on her live stream, and her followers' comments exploded with disbelief and anger. The narrative was writing itself, entitled, "White Woman Discriminates Against Black Passenger, Then Claims to Be the Victim When Held Accountable." Maya watched it all unfold with the calm satisfaction of someone who had predicted exactly this outcome. She had known that giving Victoria enough rope would result in her hanging herself publicly. Every escalation, every discriminatory comment, every refusal to acknowledge basic facts was being documented and broadcast to the world. But Maya wasn't just interested in viral social media justice. She was building a legal case documenting corporate negligence and exposing the depth of bias in the aviation industry. Her phone buzzed with a text from Amanda Rivera. All devices in position. Legal team monitoring social media feeds. Evidence acquisition complete. Ready for Phase 3 on your command. Maya typed back. Execute Phase 3. Full implementation. She looked at her watch. 3 minutes until the 12-minute deadline she had given Victoria. Luis approached Maya one more time, his face showing the internal conflict he was experiencing. Ms. Rodriguez, Luis said quietly, I want you to know that I believe you're in the right here. Your boarding pass clearly shows seat 1A, and Mrs. Hartwell's behavior has been inappropriate. Maya studied his face. But I'm being pressured to find a compromise solution. My supervisor is suggesting that we upgrade you to our Polaris suite on the upper deck, give you extra amenities, and avoid further confrontation. Maya's expression didn't change. In exchange for giving up my assigned seat to someone who's been discriminating against me? Luis nodded miserably. That's exactly the problem, Maya said. The assumption that discrimination can be solved with upgrades and amenities instead of accountability and consequences. She raised her voice slightly, ensuring that the recording passengers could hear her clearly. I don't want compensation for being discriminated against. I want the discrimination to stop. I want the person responsible to face consequences. And I want the structure that enabled this discrimination to be changed so it doesn't happen to the next person. The statement was powerful, principled, and perfect for social media. Marcus immediately tweeted it as a quote. Elena repeated it for her live stream audience. David nodded approvingly as he continued recording. Victoria, meanwhile, was growing increasingly desperate. She could see that public opinion had turned completely against her, that her behavior was being documented and shared across social media, that she was becoming the face of entitled racist privilege. Instead of backing down, she made one final catastrophic mistake. Fine Victoria screamed, her voice carrying throughout the first-class cabin and into economy. You want to know the truth. People like you shouldn't be in first class in the first place. You get these seats through affirmative action and diversity programs, not because you earned them. Some of us actually worked for what we have. The racist rant was so explicit, so undeniably discriminatory, that the cabin fell completely silent. Even the ambient noise of the aircraft devices seemed to fade away. Marcus's hands were shaking as he typed, "She just went full racist. Audio and video captured. This is the most explicit discrimination I've ever witnessed." Elena's live stream comments were moving so fast she couldn't read them. Her follower count had climbed past 30,000 as people shared the stream across platforms. David Brennan stood up from his seat, his face pale with shock. "Ma'am, that was completely inappropriate and discriminatory. I'm a witness to what you just said, and it was unacceptable." Victoria looked around the cabin and saw only faces filled with disgust, disappointment, and anger. She had completely isolated herself, destroyed any remaining sympathy, and provided irrefutable evidence of her discriminatory motivations. Maya checked her watch one final time. 12 minutes, she said quietly, and right on schedule her phone rang. Maya answered the phone with deliberate calmness, speaking loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear every word. "Yes, Amanda. Confirmed. Initiate full shutdown protocol. All Elite Airlines operations effective immediately." She paused, listening to the voice on the other end while maintaining eye contact with Victoria. "Yes, that includes cargo maintenance, ground operations, and logistics coordination. Full audit, full investigation, full accountability." Maya hung up and slipped the phone back into her coat pocket. The cabin remained silent except for the gentle hum of aircraft devices that would soon go quiet. Who was that, Victoria demanded, though her voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. "What shutdown? What are you talking about?" Maya stood up slowly, her movement deliberate and controlled. When she spoke, her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Allow me to properly introduce myself, Maya said, addressing not just Victoria but everyone in the cabin. I'm Maya Rodriguez, Chief Executive Officer of Apex Global Solutions. The name hit the aviation professionals in the cabin like a physical blow. Jennifer Walsh's face went white. Luis dropped the champagne bottle he had been holding, sending glass scattering across the galley floor. Even Captain Kane, listening through the intercom device, felt his stomach drop. Apex Global Solutions wasn't just another logistics company. It was the backbone of Elite Airline's entire operation. For those unfamiliar with my company, Maya continued, her voice carrying the measured cadence of a boardroom presentation, Apex Global manages Elite Airlines cargo operations, ground logistics, maintenance scheduling, and supply chain coordination. We process 847 tons of cargo daily for Elite manage their spare parts. Inventory, coordinate their maintenance schedules across 340 aircraft, and handle logistics for 127 airports in their network. Victoria's face had gone from flushed anger to pale confusion. I don't understand. What does that have to do with anything? Maya smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It means, Mrs. Hartwell, that when you decided to discriminate against me, you weren't just attacking a passenger. You were attacking the person whose company keeps this airline in the sky. The implications were beginning to dawn on everyone in the cabin. Marcus was typing frantically, updating his followers with the shocking revelation. Elena's livestream audience was exploding with comments as viewers realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Maya's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She answered it on speaker. Maya, this is Amanda Rivera, Apex Global Security Director. Protocol 7 is fully activated. All Elite Airlines devices under our management are now offline pending discrimination review. Status report, Maya said. Flight 847 is grounded indefinitely. All Elite cargo flights are suspended. Maintenance operations are halted. Ground logistics are frozen. Their operations center is showing red across all boards. Victoria was staring at Maya with growing horror. You can't do that. You can't just shut down an airline. Maya turned to face her directly. I'm not shutting down an airline, Mrs. Hartwell. I'm exercising the contractual rights my company holds to suspend services pending resolution of discrimination incidents. It's written into every contract we sign specifically to prevent situations like this. Jennifer Walsh stepped forward, her professional composure cracking. Ms. Rodriguez, surely we can resolve this situation without such drastic measures. If Mrs. Hartwell would just move to her assigned seat. The time for simple resolution passed 20 minutes ago, Maya replied. Mrs. Hartwell had multiple opportunities to correct her behavior. Instead, she chose to escalate discriminate and ultimately deliver an explicitly racist rant that was captured by multiple witnesses and broadcast live to thousands of people. Luis found his voice speaking with newfound courage. Ms. Rodriguez, I want you to know that I recognized this was discrimination from the beginning. I should have acted more decisively to protect your rights. Maya nodded approvingly. Your hesitation is understandable, Luis. You were caught between your training and institutional pressure to avoid confronting VIP passengers. That's exactly the problem we're going to fix. Another phone rang. This time it was Jennifer's radio crackling to life with an urgent message from the cockpit. Jennifer, this is Captain Kane. I need an immediate briefing on the situation in first class. Operations is reporting that we've lost all ground support cargo handling and maintenance coordination. What's happening down there? Jennifer looked at Maya desperately. Maya gestured for her to respond. Captain, we have a situation. The passenger in seat 1A is Maya Rodriguez, CEO of Apex Global Solutions. She's initiated some kind of protocol in response to a discrimination incident. The radio was silent for several seconds before Kane's shaken voice responded. Maya Rodriguez, the Apex CEO. Jesus Christ, Jennifer, what have you people done? Maya stepped toward the intercom panel. "Captain Kane, this is Maya Rodriguez. I'd like to speak with you directly." Another pause, then Ms. Rodriguez. "I'm coming down to the cabin immediately." While they waited for the captain, Maya's phone continued buzzing with updates from her team. "Maya, this is Thomas Chen from our operations center," came a voice on speaker. "Elite's stock price is dropping rapidly as news of the shutdown spreads. They're down 8% in the last 15 minutes. Legal department reporting, came another voice. "We have complete documentation of the discrimination incident thanks to the social media coverage. Multiple witnesses' video evidence and audio recordings of explicitly racist statements. Media relations here. Story is trending globally. Elite Airlines bias is the top hashtag worldwide. Major news outlets are picking up the story." Victoria sat down heavily in seat 1A, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had triggered. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know who you were." Maya's response was sharp and immediate. "It shouldn't matter who I am, Mrs. Hartwell. You discriminated against me because you thought I was powerless. Because you assumed that a young black woman couldn't possibly belong in first class legitimately. The fact that I happen to have the power to hold you accountable doesn't change what you did or why you did it." Captain Kane emerged from the cockpit, his uniform slightly disheveled and his face grim. At 55, Robert Kane had been flying for Elite Airlines for 20 years, working his way up from regional jets to wide-body international routes. He had never faced a situation like this. "Miss Rodriguez," Kane said, his voice carefully respectful. "I understand there's been an incident, and I want you to know that Elite Airlines takes all discrimination complaints seriously." Maya's expression didn't soften. "Captain Kane, your crew had 20 minutes to address clear, obvious discrimination happening in your cabin. Instead, they tried to pressure me to give up my seat to accommodate someone who was openly expressing racist views. That's not taking discrimination seriously. That's enabling it." Kane's shoulders sagged slightly. He knew she was right. What can we do to make this right? For starters, Mrs. Hartwell needs to be removed from this aircraft immediately. She's violated federal regulations by refusing to sit in her assigned seat, and she's created a hostile environment for other passengers through her discriminatory behavior. Victoria jumped up from the seat. "You can't remove me from the plane. I have rights." Maya's voice was steel. "You forfeited those rights when you decided to discriminate against me. Captain Kane, I'm requesting that Mrs. Hartwell be denied boarding on this aircraft." Kane nodded grimly. "Airport security is on their way." "This is insane," Victoria screamed. "You're all ganging up on me. I'm the victim here." Marcus looked up from his phone, where he had been providing live updates to his growing audience. "Ma'am, you discriminated against someone, got called out for it, and now you're facing consequences. That's not victimization. That's accountability." Elena's live stream audience had grown to over 40,000 viewers, with comments flooding in from around the world supporting Maya and condemning Victoria's behavior. "The world is watching this," Elena announced, "and the world is seeing exactly who you really are." David Brennan, the businessman who had been quietly documenting everything, stood up and addressed the cabin. "I've been a corporate executive for over 20 years, and I've never seen such clear-cut discrimination." Ms. Rodriguez showed remarkable restraint in the face of behavior that was both unprofessional and illegal. Victoria looked around the cabin desperately seeking any ally, any support, any validation for her position. She found none. Every face looked back at her with disgust, disappointment, or pity. "My husband will hear about this," Victoria said, her voice breaking. "Preston Hartwell is an important man. He has connections." Maya pulled out her phone one more time. "Let's call him together. Amanda, please connect me with Preston Hartwell." The call connected quickly. Maya put it on speaker so everyone could hear. "Preston Hartwell here." Mr. Hartwell, this is Maya Rodriguez, CEO of Apex Global Solutions. I'm calling about your wife's behavior on Elite Airlines Flight 847. There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. Ms. Rodriguez. What about Victoria? What's happened? Your wife has spent the last 30 minutes discriminating against me, refusing to follow federal aviation regulations, and making explicitly racist statements that have been recorded and broadcast live to social media. She's currently being removed from the aircraft. The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds before Hartwell's voice returned tight with panic. Ms. Rodriguez, I am so sorry. Victoria doesn't speak for me or my company. Please don't let her behavior affect our business relationship. Maya's voice was cold. Mr. Hartwell, you're assuming I want to continue our business relationship. Apex Global Solutions doesn't work with companies whose leadership tolerates discrimination. Please, Hartwell's voice cracked. Victoria's behavior is her own. It doesn't reflect my values or my company's values. I'll handle this personally. You'll have the opportunity to address it, Maya replied. In federal court during the discrimination lawsuit that's being filed this afternoon. She hung up and Victoria collapsed back into the seat, finally understanding that her actions had consequences that extended far beyond this airplane cabin. Airport security arrived at the gate with Tom Mitchell, Elite Airlines operations manager, trailing behind them, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Ms. Rodriguez Mitchell said, his voice shaking slightly. I'm Tom Mitchell, operations manager for Elite. I want to personally apologize for what you've experienced on our aircraft. This is completely unacceptable. Maya studied his face. Mr. Mitchell, this didn't happen in a vacuum. Your staff received discrimination training, yet they still tried to pressure me to give up my seat to accommodate someone expressing racist views. This represents a failure of leadership training and corporate culture. Mitchell nodded miserably. You're absolutely right. What can we do to begin making this right? You can start by acknowledging that this isn't an isolated incident. My company has been receiving discrimination complaints about Elite Airlines for 6 months. This was a test to see if those complaints were justified. A test. Mitchell's voice was barely a whisper. I booked this flight specifically to see how I would be treated as a black woman traveling alone in first class. Your airline failed that test completely. The security officers approached Victoria, who was still sitting in Maya's seat as if refusing to accept reality. Ma'am, you need to come with us, the lead officer said. Victoria looked at Maya one last time, her expression a mixture of anger, fear, and dawning realization. This isn't over. You've destroyed my reputation, my marriage, my life. For what? A seat on an airplane. Maya's response was quiet but carried throughout the silent cabin. I didn't destroy anything, Mrs. Hartwell. I simply held up a mirror. Everything that's happening to you now is the result of choices you made, words you said, and values you revealed. The only thing I did was refuse to be invisible. As security escorted Victoria from the aircraft, she was no longer the confident, entitled woman who had poured champagne on Maya's shoes. She was broken, exposed, and facing a future where her racist behavior would define her public identity forever. But Maya Rodriguez wasn't finished. The removal of one discriminatory passenger was just the beginning. She was about to transform an entire industry. The aircraft fell silent as Victoria Hartwell was escorted down the jet bridge, her yellow heels clicking against the metal flooring in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown to consequences. But Maya Rodriguez wasn't watching Victoria's departure. She was focused on her phone, where messages from her team were arriving every few seconds with updates that would reshape Elite Airlines forever. Amanda, status report, Maya said, answering her security director's call on speaker, so everyone in the cabin could hear the scope of what was unfolding. Elite Airlines is in complete crisis mode. Amanda Rivera's voice came through clearly. Operations are paralyzed across their entire network. 847 flights are currently grounded awaiting cargo maintenance or logistics support that we've suspended. Their stock has dropped 14% and falling. Their CEO is demanding an emergency board meeting. Captain Kane, who had remained in the first-class cabin, looked physically ill. Ms. Rodriguez, surely there's a way to resolve this that doesn't ground the entire airline. Maya turned to face him, her expression unyielding. Captain, your crew witnessed obvious discrimination for 30 minutes and chose to enable it rather than stop it. Your senior flight attendant suggested I should give up my assigned seat to appease a passenger making racist demands. This isn't a customer service failure. This is institutional discrimination. Tom Mitchell stepped forward, his face pale with the realization that his company was hemorrhaging money by the minute. Ms. Rodriguez, I take full responsibility for our crew's failures. Please tell me what we can do to make this right. You can start with immediate personnel action, Maya replied. Every employee who enabled or ignored the discrimination needs to face consequences. Her phone rang again. This time it was her legal team. Maya, this is Sarah Kim from legal. We've documented everything through the social media recordings. We have grounds for federal civil rights violations, breach of contract, and negligent training claims. Also, the Department of Transportation wants to speak with you immediately. Put them through, Maya said. The call transferred and a new voice joined the conversation. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Janet Walsh from the DOT's Office of Aviation Consumer Protection. We've been monitoring the social media coverage of this incident. Can you confirm that you're the CEO of Apex Global Solutions and that you experienced discrimination on Elite Airlines Flight 847? That's correct, Maya replied. I have multiple witnesses, video evidence and audio recordings of explicitly racist statements made by a passenger who was enabled by airline staff. We're launching an immediate investigation. Can you provide us with all documentation already being prepared for transmission? You'll have everything within the hour. Marcus Thompson, who had been live tweeting the entire conversation, looked up from his phone with amazement. Ms. Rodriguez, your story has been viewed over 5 million times in the last hour. Elite Airlines bias is trending in 12 countries. I've never seen anything spread this fast. Elena Vasquez had ended her live stream but was now fielding interview requests from major news networks. CNN wants to interview you, she told Maya. So do NBC, the BBC, and about 20 other outlets. Maya nodded. Amanda, coordinate media strategy. This story needs to reach everyone who's experienced discrimination in aviation. They need to know they're not alone and that there are consequences for this behavior. Jennifer Walsh, the senior flight attendant, approached Maya with obvious trepidation. Ms. Rodriguez, I want to apologize personally. I should have enforced your seating rights immediately. Instead, I tried to find a compromise that would have rewarded discrimination. Maya studied Jennifer's face. Your training taught you to avoid confronting VIP passengers even when they're violating federal regulations and basic human decency. That training needs to change. I understand if I'm being terminated, Jennifer said quietly. That's not my decision to make, Maya replied. But if Elite Airlines is serious about change, they need to evaluate every employee who was involved in this incident. Tom Mitchell's radio crackled with urgent messages from Elite's corporate headquarters. He stepped aside to take the calls, but his increasingly desperate responses were audible to everyone. Yes, sir, I understand the financial implications. No, sir, I don't know when services will be restored. Yes, sir. I realize the board is furious. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her CFO. Elite's stock is in free fall. Market cap down $2.3 billion. Trading may be halted. She showed the message to Captain Kane and Tom Mitchell. This is what accountability looks like. Every minute your airline enables discrimination costs millions of dollars. That's the only language corporate America understands. Luis Morales, who had been standing quietly near the galley, finally found his courage. Ms. Rodriguez, I want to say something publicly. Maya gestured for him to continue. Luis pulled out his phone and began recording a video. My name is Luis Morales, and I'm a flight attendant for Elite Airlines. Today, I witnessed obvious discrimination against Ms. Maya Rodriguez, and I failed to act decisively to protect her rights. I was trained to avoid confronting VIP passengers even when they're wrong. That training is discriminatory, and it needs to change. He posted the video to his personal social media accounts, where it was immediately shared hundreds of times. Luis had just become a whistleblower, and his courage would inspire dozens of other elite employees to come forward with their own stories of institutional discrimination. Maya's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Elite Airlines CEO. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Richard Brennan, CEO of Elite Airlines. I'm calling to personally apologize for what you experienced on our aircraft and to discuss how we can make this right. Maya put the call on speaker. Mr. Brennan, your apology is noted. But apologies don't change the institutional culture that enabled today's discrimination. What can we do? Please tell me what it will take to restore our partnership and resolve this situation. Maya's response was firm and immediate. First, every employee who enabled or ignored the discrimination today needs to face consequences. Second, you need to implement comprehensive bias training for all staff. Third, you need to establish an independent oversight board for discrimination complaints. Fourth, you need to create a victim compensation fund for passengers who have experienced discrimination. Done, Brennan replied without hesitation. All of it. What else? Fifth, you need to make all discrimination complaints and their resolutions public. No more hiding behind corporate confidentiality. Sixth, you need to partner with civil rights organizations to monitor your progress. And seventh, you need to acknowledge publicly that this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of discrimination that your airline has ignored. The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds before Brennan's voice returned. Ms. Rodriguez, some of those requirements could be challenging from a legal perspective. Maya's voice hardened. Mr. Brennan, your airline is currently losing approximately $200,000 per minute while my company's services remain suspended. You can either agree to meaningful change or you can find new logistics partners while explaining to your shareholders why you chose discrimination over accountability. We accept all your terms, Brennan said quickly. Good. My legal team will draft the agreements. You'll also need to provide full compensation to Mrs. Hartwell's victim, myself, and establish a fund for other passengers who have experienced discrimination. Of course. What amount would be appropriate? Maya's smile was visible to everyone in the cabin. Donate $10 million to civil rights organizations fighting discrimination in transportation. That's not compensation for me. That's restitution to the communities your airline has harmed. Tom Mitchell's face went white at the amount, but Brennan agreed immediately. $10 million. We'll announce it today. Excellent. Amanda began restoring services in phases as Elite demonstrates compliance with each requirement. As Maya ended the call, the cabin erupted in spontaneous applause. Marcus Elena, David Luis, and even some passengers from economy who had gathered at the galley boundary clapped for several minutes. But the most significant moment came when Luis approached Maya directly. Ms. Rodriguez, I know I failed you today, but I want you to know that your courage has inspired me to be better. I'm going to make sure other employees know they have support when they stand up for what's right. Maya shook his hand firmly. Luis, your honesty just now took more courage than most people show in their entire careers. That's the foundation of real change. Within hours, the consequences rippled far beyond Flight 847. Victoria Hartwell was arrested at the airport on federal charges of filing a false police report and interfering with aircraft operations. Her husband, Preston, faced massive contract cancellations as companies distanced themselves from the family name. Social media had created a permanent record of her racist behavior that would follow her forever. But more importantly, Victoria's public downfall sent a message to anyone who thought their privilege would protect them from accountability. Discrimination has consequences, and those consequences are no longer hidden behind corporate confidentiality agreements. Elite Airlines began implementing changes immediately. Jennifer Walsh was terminated within hours. Captain Kane was grounded pending investigation. New training protocols were fast-tracked into development. The discrimination complaint process was overhauled completely. Other airlines, seeing Elite's stock price collapse and Maya's decisive action, began proactively reviewing their own policies. No one wanted to be the next company to face Apex Global's power when it was wielded for justice. As Maya finally took her seat in 1A, she wasn't thinking about revenge or personal vindication. She was thinking about the young black girl who would board an airplane next month and be treated with automatic respect because structures had changed. She was thinking about the flight attendant who would now feel empowered to stop discrimination instead of enabling it. But mostly, she was thinking about the message this moment would send to every executive, every employee, and every passenger who thought discrimination was acceptable as long as it happened quietly. Maya Rodriguez had just proven that silence was no longer an option and consequences were no longer avoidable. The age of accountability had arrived and it was flying first class. 3 weeks after Flight 847, Maya Rodriguez stood before a packed auditorium at the Department of Transportation headquarters in Washington, D.C. The room contained aviation executives, civil rights leaders, federal officials, and journalists from around the world. The woman who had been denied her seat was now dictating the future of airline passenger rights. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya began, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had commanded a crisis-ridden aircraft cabin. Discrimination in aviation isn't a customer service problem. It's a civil rights violation that requires technological solutions, federal oversight, and industry-wide accountability. The screen behind her displayed the Apex Global logo, alongside a new initiative that would transform how discrimination was detected, reported, and eliminated across the transportation industry. Today, I'm announcing the launch of Fairfly Protocol, a real-time bias detection structure that will monitor passenger interactions at every touchpoint of the travel experience. The presentation that followed outlined a comprehensive structure that would fundamentally change airline operations. Every check-in, interaction, boarding process, and in-flight service would be monitored by AI devices trained to detect discriminatory patterns. Anonymous reporting mechanisms would allow passengers and employees to flag bias incidents instantly. Most importantly, all data would be public, creating transparency that made hiding discrimination impossible. "The technology exists," Maya explained as charts showed discrimination complaint trends across the industry. "What's been missing is the will to implement it and the power to enforce it. Today, that changes." Dr. James Morrison, director of the FAA, stood to address the audience. "The Federal Aviation Administration is mandating implementation of Fairfly Protocol across all major airlines within 18 months. This isn't optional compliance, it's a licensing requirement." The announcement sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. Airlines that had spent decades managing discrimination quietly through settlements and confidentiality agreements suddenly faced a future where every bias incident would be documented, analyzed, and made public. Richard Brennan, the Elite Airlines CEO who had agreed to Maya's terms under duress, found himself in the unexpected position of endorsing the changes that his company had been forced to accept. Elite Airlines' partnership with Apex Global Solutions has shown us that proactive bias prevention isn't just morally right, it's financially essential, Brennan admitted during his presentation. "Our stock price recovered completely within 2 weeks of implementing Maya Rodriguez's requirements, and our customer satisfaction scores have reached all-time highs." The transformation hadn't been easy for Elite Airlines. Jennifer Walsh's termination had been followed by the dismissal of 12 other employees who were found to have engaged in discriminatory behavior that had been previously overlooked or covered up. Captain Kane was forced into early retirement after investigators discovered multiple incidents where he had failed to address bias complaints from crew members. But the changes had also revealed unexpected heroes. Luis Morales had been promoted to training coordinator for bias prevention, and his whistleblower video had inspired 43 other elite employees to report discrimination incidents they had witnessed or experienced. Sarah Martinez, the gate agent who had initially processed Maya's boarding pass, had become an advocate for frontline employees, helping them understand when policies were being used to justify discrimination. The financial impact had been dramatic, but ultimately positive. Elite's initial stock drop of 14% had been followed by a recovery that brought shares to their highest value in company history. Investors had initially panicked at the disruption, but they quickly recognized that Maya's requirements had essentially audited and debugged Elite's operations, making the airline more efficient and legally compliant. Other airlines were scrambling to avoid Elite's painful lesson. Delta announced voluntary adoption of Fair Fly protocol within 6 months. American Airlines hired Maya's consulting firm to conduct comprehensive bias audits. United publicly committed to making all discrimination complaints and resolutions transparent. The changes extended far beyond individual airlines. Airport security began implementing similar monitoring devices. Car rental agencies adopted bias detection protocols. Hotels and hospitality companies requested access to the technology. Maya's phone rang constantly with requests from CEOs who wanted to be proactive rather than reactive. The conversation was always the same. We want to partner with Apex Global to ensure we never face what elite airlines went through. But the most significant changes were happening at the human level. Flight attendants who had been trained to avoid confronting discrimination were now empowered and required to stop it immediately. Gate agents learned to recognize when policies were being applied differently based on passenger appearance. Pilots understood that leadership meant protecting all passengers, not just those who looked like they belonged. Marcus Thompson's tech blog had become a major platform for tracking discrimination incidents and corporate responses. His coverage of Flight 847 had led to a book deal, speaking engagements, and a consulting role with Maya's team. His influence had grown from 50,000 followers to over 2 million, and he used that platform to hold companies accountable for their promises. The beautiful thing about technology, Marcus wrote in a widely shared post, is that it makes discrimination visible. You can't ignore patterns when they're documented by algorithms. You can't hide behind isolated incidents when data shows the incidents aren't isolated at all. Elena Vasquez had parlayed her live stream of the Flight 847 incident into a documentary deal with Netflix. Seat at the Table. How One Flight Changed Aviation would premiere in 6 months, featuring interviews with Maya Luis Marcus and dozens of other passengers who had experienced discrimination in aviation. But Elena's most important work was her ongoing documentation of industry changes. She traveled frequently, always live streaming her experiences, showing her followers how airline interactions had improved since Fair Fly protocol implementation. Her platform had become a real-time audit of corporate promises versus actual practice. The legal consequences were still unfolding. Victoria Hartwell had been convicted of filing false police reports and interfering with aircraft operations, receiving 6 months in federal prison and 2 years of probation. Her husband Preston's real estate empire had collapsed as partners and investors distanced themselves from the family name. The couple had divorced and Victoria was facing multiple civil rights lawsuits, but Maya had refused to pursue personal damages against Victoria. Instead, she had structured all legal settlements to fund bias prevention programs, victim compensation funds, and civil rights organizations. The message was clear: this wasn't about personal revenge, but about building structures that protected everyone. The Department of Transportation had established the Office of Aviation Equity, a new division dedicated to investigating discrimination complaints and ensuring compliance with new bias prevention requirements. Janet Walsh, the DOT official who had taken Maya's call during the crisis, now headed the office and worked directly with Maya's team to develop industry standards. Maya Rodriguez didn't just solve one incident of discrimination, Walsh told reporters. She created a framework for preventing thousands of future incidents. That's the definition of transformational leadership. 6 months after Flight 847, Maya stood in the Apex Global headquarters looking at data dashboards that showed discrimination complaints across the aviation industry. The numbers told a remarkable story. Reported incidents were up 300%, but actual discrimination was down 80%. The increase in reports reflected better detection and passengers feeling safe to speak up. The decrease in actual discrimination reflected the power of real-time monitoring and immediate consequences. Amanda Rivera Maya's security director presented the quarterly analysis. Airlines that have fully implemented Fairfly protocol show an 85% reduction in discrimination incidents. Employee confidence in reporting bias has increased 400%. Customer satisfaction among minority passengers is at historic highs. The data proved what Maya had always known: accountability worked. When discrimination had immediate public consequences, it stopped happening. When employees were empowered and protected for doing the right thing, they did it. When passengers knew their treatment was being monitored and documented, they were treated with respect. But Maya's greatest satisfaction came from a different metric entirely. Luis Morales, now a leader in bias prevention training, had compiled stories from flight attendants who had successfully intervened in potential discrimination incidents. In the past 6 months, there had been 347 documented cases of airline employees proactively stopping bias before it escalated. Each case represented someone who didn't have to experience what Maya had experienced on Flight 847. Each intervention was proof that structures could change, that people could change, and that courage was contagious. The transformation of the aviation industry had taken less than a year, but its implications extended far beyond airlines. Other industries were adopting similar monitoring devices. Universities were implementing bias detection in admissions processes. Healthcare structures were using the technology to ensure equitable treatment. Maya Rodriguez had turned a moment of personal discrimination into a catalyst for structural change across multiple sectors of the economy. She had proven that individual courage combined with institutional power and technological innovation could reshape entire industries. But as she prepared for the next phase of her mission, Maya knew that the work was far from finished. Bias was adaptive, finding new ways to manifest when old methods were blocked. Vigilance would be eternal, and the commitment to equality would need to be renewed constantly. The woman who had been told she didn't belong in Seat 1A had fundamentally changed who belonged everywhere. 6 months later, Maya Rodriguez walked through the familiar corridors of Miami International Airport. But everything had changed. The same terminals that had witnessed her humiliation now displayed Fairfly protocol monitoring stations at every gate. Digital displays showed real-time bias detection metrics. Passenger feedback kiosks offered anonymous reporting options in 12 languages. Most importantly, the atmosphere felt different. Staff interactions were professional and respectful regardless of passenger appearance. Gate agents made eye contact and smiled genuinely. The casual discrimination that had once been accepted as normal had been deliberately eliminated. As Maya approached Gate B7, the same gate where Flight 847 had been delayed that transformative day, she was greeted by a familiar face. Ms. Rodriguez Luis Morales approached with a genuine smile, his new badge reading Senior Training Coordinator, Passenger Equity Programs. "I didn't know you were flying with us today." "Surprise audit," Maya replied with a smile. "How are things, Luis? Honestly amazing. I never realized how much stress I carried from watching discrimination happen and feeling powerless to stop it. Now, when I see potential bias, I have the tools and authority to address it immediately. It's completely changed how I feel about my job." Luis gestured toward a group of new flight attendants he was training nearby. These new hires are learning bias detection from day one. They don't have to unlearn bad habits because they're never taught them in the first place. Maya watched the training session where young employees practiced recognizing and addressing discriminatory behavior. The scenarios they role-played were based on real incidents from before Fairfly protocol implementation, including detailed case studies of Flight 847. Ms. Rodriguez, one of the trainees, approached nervously. "I just wanted to say thank you. My mom faced discrimination on airlines when I was growing up, but she never had any way to address it. Knowing that we're preventing that from happening to other families means everything to me." The young woman was Sofia Martinez, Sarah's younger sister, who had been inspired by the changes at Elite Airlines to pursue a career in aviation. Sofia represented something powerful, the next generation entering an industry that had been fundamentally improved by the courage of those who came before. Maya's phone buzzed with a message from Elena Vasquez. "Documentary premieres tonight. Thanks for changing everything. Can't wait for the world to see the full story." Seat at the Table. How One Flight Changed Aviation had become one of Netflix's most watched documentaries, sparking conversations about discrimination across multiple industries. But more importantly, it had inspired dozens of other people to speak up when they witnessed bias, creating a ripple effect of accountability. Marcus Thompson had texted earlier, "Latest data shows Fairfly protocol has prevented over 3,000 discrimination incidents in 6 months. Your 12 minutes of courage are protecting thousands of people." That's the definition of heroism. The numbers were staggering, but Maya found her greatest satisfaction in the individual stories. Flight attendants who no longer dreaded confronting discrimination, passengers who traveled with confidence instead of anxiety, families who could focus on their destinations instead of worrying about how they would be treated. As Maya boarded her flight, the same route as Flight 847 departing from the same gate, she was greeted by Captain Jennifer Santos, a Latina pilot who had been promoted to senior captain after demonstrating exceptional leadership during the industry transformation. "Ms. Rodriguez, it's an honor to have you aboard. You'll be pleased to know that this aircraft was the first to receive our comprehensive bias prevention retrofit. Every interaction is monitored, every employee is trained, and every passenger is protected." Maya took seat 1A, the same seat that Victoria Hartwell had tried to steal 6 months earlier. But now it felt different. It wasn't just a premium airline seat. It was a symbol of how far they had all come. As other passengers boarded, Maya observed interactions that would have been unthinkable under the old structure. A young black businessman was upgraded to first class without question or scrutiny. A Muslim family with several children was assisted warmly by the crew. An elderly Sikh man was treated with respect and accommodation for his religious practices. The changes weren't performative or surface level. They represented a fundamental shift in how airline employees thought about their responsibilities to passengers. Discrimination wasn't just prohibited, it was actively prevented through training technology and cultural transformation. During the flight, Maya received a call from Dr. Morrison at the FAA. "Maya, I wanted to personally thank you for what you've accomplished. Discrimination complaints are down 78% across the industry. Customer satisfaction is at all-time highs, and we're seeing similar improvements in other transportation sectors. Your courage has literally changed millions of lives." But the call that meant the most came from Amanda Rivera, sharing news about Victoria Hartwell. After serving her federal sentence, Victoria had quietly enrolled in a community college program focused on social justice and conflict resolution. She had written a letter to Maya, not seeking forgiveness or absolution, but acknowledging the harm she had caused and committing to spend the rest of her life working to prevent others from making similar choices. Maya had not responded to the letter. Forgiveness was a personal journey that Victoria would have to navigate on her own. But Maya found some satisfaction in knowing that even Victoria's life had been changed by the events on Flight 847, and that change appeared to be genuine rather than performative. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Maya opened her laptop to review the latest reports from Apex Global's Bias Prevention Division. The data was encouraging. Discrimination incidents continued to decline across all monitored industries. Employee confidence in reporting bias remained high, and customer satisfaction scores for minority passengers had reached parity with majority passengers for the first time in airline history. But the most meaningful metric was harder to quantify. It was the 10-year-old girl in seat 3B who was flying first class with her grandmother, chatting excitedly about becoming a pilot when she grew up. 6 months ago, that girl might have faced scrutiny, suspicion, or subtle hostility. Today, she was treated like any other passenger, free to dream about her future without barriers based on appearance. It was the young father in seat 2A who was traveling alone with his infant daughter, receiving assistance and patience from the crew instead of judgment or annoyance. His experience would teach his daughter that respect and dignity were her birthright, not privileges to be earned. It was the elderly couple in seats 4A and 4B immigrants who spoke limited English but were being helped with genuine warmth rather than impatience or dismissal. Their comfort and dignity mattered as much as any VIP passengers. Maya's phone buzzed with one final message of the day from Luis. Just finished training session with new pilots. Shared your story as an example of how one person's courage can change everything. They were inspired. Thank you for showing us all what leadership really looks like. As Flight 847's successor descended toward London, Maya reflected on the journey that had begun in this very cabin 6 months earlier. She had boarded that first flight as a test, looking for evidence of discrimination that she could address through corporate channels. Instead, she had found something much more significant: the opportunity to transform an entire industry. The woman who had been told she didn't belong in first class had redefined what belonging meant for everyone. She had proven that dignity wasn't a luxury to be rationed, but a right to be protected. Most importantly, she had demonstrated that individual courage, when combined with institutional power and unwavering principle, could move mountains. 3 years later, Maya Rodriguez stood before the United Nations Human Rights Council addressing delegates from 193 countries about the global expansion of bias prevention technology. Fair Fly Protocol had been adopted by transportation companies in 47 countries, and similar devices were being implemented in healthcare, education, and financial services worldwide. Discrimination thrives in darkness, Maya told the assembly. Technology doesn't eliminate bias, but it makes bias visible. And once bias is visible, it can be addressed, prevented, and eliminated. The young girl who had dreamed of becoming a pilot on that flight 3 years earlier was now in the audience, having won a scholarship to an elite aviation academy through the Maya Rodriguez Foundation for Transportation Equity. She represented hundreds of young people whose paths had been cleared by the changes that began on Flight 847. Luis Morales had been promoted to Director of Global Equity Programs for elite airlines and was now consulting with transportation companies worldwide. Marcus Thompson's book about the Flight 847 incident had become required reading in business schools and civil rights programs. Elena Vasquez was producing a follow-up documentary about the global spread of bias prevention technology. But the greatest victory was the simplest one: millions of people now traveled without fear of discrimination, secure in the knowledge that their dignity was protected by devices designed to ensure equality. Maya had never intended to become a civil rights leader. She had simply refused to accept discrimination when it was directed at her. That refusal, that moment of quiet courage in Seat 1A, had cascaded into a global movement for transportation equity. The woman who had been told to move to the back where she belonged had instead moved the entire world forward. And in airports, train stations, and transportation hubs around the globe, her legacy ensured that everyone belonged in first class. The 12 minutes that changed everything had become a lifetime of transformation, proving that justice delayed is never justice denied when someone has the courage to demand it. Justice doesn't scream. It simply refuses to be moved. Thank you for watching this story of courage and transformation. If Maya Rodriguez's journey inspired you to stand up for what's right, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that prove dignity and justice can change the world. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters and that discrimination will never be tolerated again. Remember, real change happens when we refuse to be silent in the face of injustice. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join our community of people who believe everyone deserves to be treated with respect, whether they're sitting in first class or fighting for their place at the table of equality.